should a plugin consume its MIDI events? And I'm specifically talking about instrument plugins, because that is handled differently in different DAWs, and I will explore this topic now in Bitwig and in Cubase, hoping that I can find some interesting thoughts that are mostly interesting for DAW developers, so they can either make good DAWs or improve their DAWs to be good and make good decisions. But I would also like to invite all the musicians and producers working with DAWs to stick around and just share their opinion. So first of all, I will define what I mean by consuming. When an instrument plugin uses the MIDI information, the MIDI events that go into the instrument, then the DAW can decide if they will be deleted after that or if they will be passed on to the effect chain, basically. And that can be handled differently in different DAWs. And here with Bitwig, we have DAW that actually passes them on to the effect chain. And I will show you what that means and which pros and cons that have, and then we will go on to Cubase to see what's the difference. So we have this bass line here, and has Surge XT on it, which is a very good synthesizer with very natural sounding synthy tones, if that makes sense. Has a lot of FM stuff, that's why I feel like that. Now, what I could do here is I could instantiate an instance of my self-made plugin Nell, which is a vibrato, and it has an audio rate modulator that expects MIDI input. And now, because the audio rate modulator actually modulates the vibrato in audio rate speed, so faster than an LFO. LFOs are like going up to 20 Hertz, and everything up faster is considered audio rate. So when you're modulating things at that speed, then they don't appear as the thing that they were actually anymore. So even though this is generally a vibrato, which I can also demonstrate, once it is played at audio rate speeds, it becomes to phase distortion. And that's cool because it sort of extends the functionality of the synthesizer that I already have. At least it feels like that, because you have a synthesizer here, and then you're just instantiating an effect plugin, and it uses the same MIDI events instantly. And you don't have to think of it and root anything, it just works. And that's really cool, I think. Of course, it's a little bit less versatile than having the functions in the synthesizer itself, because obviously this is monophonic and it works because this is a monophonic bass line. But that's just the kind of stuff that you sometimes deal with. Now, I think this one also has a function for MIDI input, if I'm correct. Oh, wait, that was... yeah, MIDI. Yeah, cool. I actually never used this plugin like that before, but it totally makes sense immediately, which is cool. So these are very good examples for passing on the MIDI events instead of consuming them, but there are also bad examples for that. For example, Pro C2. FabFilter, well-known compressor, and everyone loves it, as far as I know, even though it's already pretty old, but you know, it just works. It's just so good. But once I switched from Cubase to Bitwig, I had a very big problem with it. This was the default state. And you see it's always just going down completely, going up completely, and it seems kind of random. No, it seems like it follows some logic, but it's not what you would expect from the gain curve. Well, you already saw what I did because you saw me ticking this on. This is the default state of Pro C, enable MIDI, so you can actually trigger the compressor with MIDI events, and but this feature sort of implies that the MIDI events will not be passed on by the DAW directly, but rather be routed from somewhere else. And since this is the default state of the plugin, everyone who switches from another DAW to Bitwig and wants to use their FabFilter suite gets confused first. I talked to the support because I did not figure this out, and the support figured it out for me, the FabFilter support. And yeah, I can only imagine that a lot of people don't write a message to the support and then just say, well, fuck it, the plugin doesn't work on in Bitwig. But it does. It works just fine. Now, so that is a problem. Now what I'm just asking myself is, how can I prevent MIDI input from going on at this point? Maybe I could use node grid. Yeah. Oops. I wanted to type node grid. Cause yeah, open node grid please. Okay. Seems to be a bit laggy now. I think it's because of OBS. The program that I'm writing my recording my video with. Sorry, I was just a little bit confused because I have to do so many things simultaneously. So node grid, because I already had to plan out how I want to talk about this. Node grid is a feature that is quite new in Bitwig, and it lets you put effects to the node values and stuff before passing them on. Well, but we could probably also just stop passing nodes on. Yeah, and that seems to work just fine as well. So we can actually keep the default state of Pro C2 if we want to. We just have to make sure that the flow of nodes stops. Only problem then is that if you wanted to have another instance of something that wants to consume the nodes, then that probably doesn't work. Yeah, the sound didn't change. Even though I gotta say, you could also just receive the node. If anyone knows if I can turn that off, that it always keeps takes a different thingy here. Because I actually always want any device type, because I'm typing it in here anyway. Then please tell me about it. Well, so here we could just Rift filter lights output. Oh, this thing has an output. Actually, I just wanted to have the MIDI input from the bass in general. But let's try this. Yeah, and that works as well. So we can actually get our stream of nodes back in Bitwig and all in the same chain without feeling like you have been routing something with tracks and stuff. So even though this is kind of this was kind of weird at first and put me off and forced me to use other compressors for a while, After I figured it out, it felt very natural. And now I'll turn this off again because I generally just want this to be independent of MIDI. I didn't know that it had MIDI capabilities anyway, so I obviously don't use the plugin like that and don't need it like that. And if I ever need it like that, I can turn it on then. So that is, I'm totally fine with this solution now. Okay, so here we are in Cubase now, where we try to do the same thing on this beat. And so on. I probably used the same beat in another video already, at least I remember something like that, and even for a similar topic, I think. But I will just do it again now, but this time with the cute plug sound, which is an instance of image line hammer with this haunting forest image producing the sound. And yeah, and a bunch of plugins. Oh yeah, and I remember I wanted to make a video about this plugin, but then I didn't do it because it's nice, but it's expensive. I got it for sale, so when it's like very hard on sale, then it's cool, I guess, but I don't see why it's so expensive. Anyway, let's go. Now I want to have my plugin on this Nell. And I want it to have the audio rate modulator. And what does it do? Nothing. And the reason is because in Cubase you have to route audio to your effects directly. And not audio MIDI. Sorry, I was confused. Now let's copy this MIDI track. And now let us route this to our instance of Nell, to the cute plug. Oh, actually I want to use a lower buffer size for this. So if you're not familiar with my plugin, you can change the buffer size of the internal delay, and then the depth knob has a bit more sensitivity when you're lowering it and stuff. So yeah, I have to do that. Now, the advantage and of this, not gonna lie, is that you can just replace the MIDI notes with other MIDI notes, like in this case the bass line. Oh, I don't hear the effect, probably because the notes are too low. Well, in this case, it's not an improvement to use different notes, but you can do that. Now, one problem that I have with this, obviously, is that I'm copying notes, unless I'm writing a completely unique MIDI line here. I'm basically just copying notes from a different track, and that, of course, has certain problems when you keep on composing, and at some point you might notice that your whole track sounds better if you use this note instead for that particular pitch class there, and instead of this. And now you would have to go to both tracks in order to shift that around. Make sure that you have the multi-layer editing thingy enabled, and then you can do that. Oops, it did not work because the multi-layer thingy has to be disabled apparently. Yeah, that's how it worked. That is definitely not an improvement, but it was kind of spicy, I guess, to say it in Adam Neely words. Anyway, so I don't know what kind of conclusion we should get from this, because apparently this is also a solution, and it does not take too long or anything. It is a very valid workflow. I was thinking if I should also show how it works in FL Studio, because it's kind of complicated, but I don't entirely understand how it works there. So I should not make a video about something that I don't understand entirely myself. I just know it is complicated. It requires a lot of submenus and stuff, so I won't even get into that. If some FL Studio developers watch this, then this whole thing that you have there is just a mess. You should start over from scratch when it comes to MIDI routing to plugins. And instead I just want to focus on how it works in the DAWs where it actually is rather easy, like Cubase and Bitwig. And because Cubase and Bitwig are so similar in that sense and just only have minor differences, it is easy to compare them. For example, I could instantiate an instance of Pro C here now and pretend like MIDI is enabled by default. Oh, it is. Okay. Now I'm playing something back. And of course, it just works. Now, actually, let's try something funny, which is sidechaining these by the bass line. Oh, oops, no, I don't have to. I have to do it differently, because I would still want to keep this as my Nell modulator thingy. So I have to make another track. And then route this MIDI to my instance of Pro C on the queued plug. But which one? The last one probably. I am confused now, because now it seems to use the audio input, but the MIDI input as well? No. I misunderstood that. The threshold control just controls how deep it goes down, but it's not reacting to audio. Okay, that's cool. Okay, that's actually pretty cool. I do like the MIDI enable feature in Pro C, even though I didn't use it before. It's cool. Now, what is not so cool is that I again have made another MIDI track that sort of has to work with the other MIDI track at all times. Now, of course, there is a way to solve this in Cubase, and that way is to mute those tracks. By the way, Bitwig developers, if you're watching this, you don't have the feature where one can mute tracks or notes without actually deleting them. This is a powerful feature in Cubase. You should definitely add that. Now getting back to topic. Yeah, you can route MIDI from these external MIDI tracks. I call them external because they don't have an instrument on them. And send them, no, not audio send, but MIDI send them to the Juicy Bass. And this one obviously would go to the cute plug. Now on this example in particular, I think I'm not too much of a fan of the way my plugin now sounds. But it's good enough for demonstration. I liked it on the bass line on the other track though. So I think there was another issue with this, because obviously, first of all, this is cool because it definitely lets us only maintain one MIDI track instead of two. And we can also route it to even more things. As we can see here, there are some more slots for routing MIDI to. And well, this is a little bit messy because the MIDI events are on a different track than on the ones that, you know, play the music. And that is, first of all, a little bit unintuitive. You could probably get around that a little bit by using reasonable color coding and reasonable track names. Now that makes a lot of sense, I guess. But we should not forget that we have only done this now, especially for this track, to get MIDI into this track, to only get MIDI to some other stuff of this track. So just from a visual point of view, it would make sense if this could just be here, but it can't. And when it comes to this thing, it's a little bit more complicated because it definitely goes to the Juicy Bass, but it also sidechains the compressor on this thing. So it makes sense that it's kind of its own track, I guess. And yeah. Now, I once had another issue with all this. Let me try if I can recreate it, or if it was fixed in the meantime sometimes. I don't know. Can I talk while freezing is happening? I'm actually not sure. It might be that the computer is working so hard that I will sound all stuttering, but maybe not. Okay, so I kind of thought that there were problems about freezing tracks in this particular example, because I once experienced some problems in this regard, but I wasn't able if I could reproduce it now on the fly, because it always happens in very complicated contexts. But it does seem to work just fine here, because as we know, both of these tracks influence the Qt plug. So obviously freezing it makes the MIDI tracks associated with any of that be frozen as well. And that makes a lot of sense. Maybe it was a different problem with multiple instruments being triggered from the same MIDI or something like that. So that's definitely not a point to consider here. Sorry if that was a little bit cryptic. I just wanted to find out. Okay, so let's get back to the original question. Should a plugin consume its MIDI events, or should the MIDI events be passed on? That is a very complicated question, and I can't answer it because this is a valid workflow, and the workflow in Bitwig is also a valid workflow. But there are of course some restrictions here, like you can only put a bunch of cents here, and you can put exactly one effect on the MIDI before sending it somewhere else. So if you wanted to put more effects on it, then you would have to like make another MIDI track and send it there, and then use an effect on that while sending that somewhere else. And if you have a big project, not one like this, but one with hundreds of tracks, then you will definitely not have the patience for that kind of crap. Especially not considering that all the MIDI effects in Cubase look like this. I mean, what is this? Are we still in the 90s or what? Value range 0, 127. I know these are the MIDI values, but who cares? Typical Cubase thing, you know? But that's not really answering the question that I had for this video, because that's more of a bigger problem about the DAW Cubase, and it kind of leaves the realm of just the question if a plugin should consume those events. But that's definitely something that they should consider in order to even reach this question, because if this thing only has a bunch of routing options and not unlimited ones like in Bitwig, then of course it makes sense that the things are like outsourced like this, because you can do a lot with that anyway, so it can't get too messy. But in Bitwig, where the unlimited options are, there is a bigger need for a very good structure in a visual way, so that you can, even if you are routing things very crazily around, like a lot of parallel processing and sidechaining from this to that to those, and so on and so on, sometimes a little bit of back and forth, and sometimes the difference between pre and post, and it all has to be accessible and easy to use, despite being very complex in the background. And that's one of the biggest issues with UX design, UI UX, and a big responsibility for the DAW developers, bigger than the actual functionality or the existence of the functionality itself. Because obviously there is a lot of stuff in here, but if it looks like this and no one's gonna use it, then that's like wasted time implementing that. And that's very sad, because I bet there is a lot of good stuff in there. And I also don't want to say that it always is perfect in Bitwig. For example, I did not like that I had to, make the note grid enabled just to bypass the MIDI stream and then use a note receiver to get it back into that track. Especially from my developer point of view, I'm asking myself if this is even if this even has a good performance. to just delete MIDI nodes and then bring them back instead of just routing them from somewhere else. So I guess from that perspective, it does make sense to just define a clear source of the MIDI and a clear destination in such a list type of view, instead of modules that kind of remove things and then add them again and stuff like that, which could also be seen as messy in some way. So what is the solution? What is actually the quintessential solution from this video? I actually don't know. Let's discuss this. If you have an opinion about that, then leave a comment, and maybe we can discuss that. And if it's enough content, then maybe there can even be a follow-up video, and then we can shed some light to the mystery if a plugin should actually consume the MIDI events, because at this point it is just unclear.